So you guys know I'm always on a quest or a tangent, call it whatever you will, to increase the lifespan and the longevity of any car on the road. Now with that being said, there's always modifications you can do to help increase the lifespan of your engine, but there's also things you can do for free, 100% free, to make your car last longer. Now, we are going to go into some bad driving habits that I see some people have. It's not even driving habits, some are driving habits, some are just car owning habits. So we're gonna crack into some of these and hopefully they help you guys increase the longevity of your engine. So welcome back to Smeedia, let's get into it. So first up on the docket is going to be IATs. Now, this is your intake. You guys already know that. Don't need to tell you that. The sole function of the intake is to feed air into the engine to mix with your fuel. So that way you get the bang. So that way your car can go. So that way you can have fun or get to wherever you're going. Now, one of the biggest things that I see people do, and I know this from firsthand experience because some of you, not saying it's all of you guys, but some people out there have tried to play with me on the freeway and stop and go traffic when it's 110 degrees outside. Now, the issue with that is when you sit in traffic, your intake temps skyrocket. They get very, very, very hot very quickly, especially in some places like Arizona, Texas, some of these southern areas where it gets a lot hotter. Now, the issue with that is when it gets hot, the air becomes less dense. When the air becomes less dense, you get less air. So we're gonna touch on turbos a little bit because I don't know if everyone knows what a turbo does, but essentially the turbo sucks in air, compresses it, passes through the charge piping, goes up through the intercooler where ambient temperature is then passed over the surface of the intercooler to cool the charged air as much as your intercooler will allow. Some intercoolers are going to do a better job than others, i.e. front mounts versus top mounts. I have a whole video on that one. Link it down there, go watch it if you'd like. But after it's been cooled off, then it goes into the throttle body where it gets into the engine, you get a little bit cooler air, fuel mixes, like I said, you get the bang, you get the boom, you go. So because your turbo runs off of exhaust gas and it spins that impeller wheel to suck in all that air, your turbo gets fairly hot also. So now you are having heat soak from the turbocharger, you have a lot of hot air from ambient temperatures, and you also have the stop and go traffic of your engine going up and down in RPMs, also baking everything in the engine bay. So when your engine starts sucking in all this hot air, your ECU is going to try to compensate for it and pull timing on the engine, which is a good thing because that's going to save your motor. But if you can avoid making your engine pull timing in traffic going from 0 to 15 miles an hour and you want to hit 15 psi just for the hell of it, I would suggest you not do so. Now, I do want to put a premise and a little bit of a definition around what a high IAT is. Essentially for me, I define a high intake temperature as anything above 20 to 30 degrees above ambient temp. However, that was with a top mount intercooler. Now that I'm on a front mount intercooler, my IATs don't really see anything above 5 degrees ambient. However, your ambient temps are going to dictate what a high IAT is around your area. But generally, if you're a top mount, I'm going to say 20 to 30 degrees above ambient is going to be a high IAT temp. If you're front mount, I'm going to put that same definition on there and put that around a high IAT. Now, what can you do to combat IATs? Well, I'm glad you asked because there's actually quite a bit. So when it comes to reducing IATs, I've done a lot with my car to try to bring down those IATs as much as possible to be able to get a better, just cooler, denser air going into the engine. So as you guys know, I run a front mount intercooler. It definitely helps bring down those IATs as the intercooler core is now outside of the engine bay and it is getting a lot more of that fresh air in front of the bumper versus a top mount. Now, yes, you do have the downside of the longer charge piping, but you know, it's a give and take thing with cars. Now, what else you can do is you can go and relocate your IAT sensor into the charge piping of your intercooler or your intercooler itself, which will give you a much more accurate reading of IATs. So that way you're not pulling them off the MAF. As you can see, the MAF is pretty much enclosed into this box over here. So if the inside of this box starts to get very hot, it is definitely going to throw off those IAT readings. Now, heat extraction is another one you can do. You guys know I run hood vents. So any way to get the hot air out and the cool air in is definitely going to help reduce those IATs. But if you can just minimize getting into boost while having high IATs, your engine is going to love you for that. I promise you this. The next category that we're going to swing right into is going to be fuel. That's more full than I thought it was. So when it comes to driving a turbocharged car, there are a lot of very temperamental things that can happen with the engine, especially with Subarus. So if you are using bad fuel or the improper octane rating, you can run into a plethora of issues. Some of those issues being you can have decreased dam, increased knock, increased fine knock learn, the list can go on. Your car can idle rough, it can idle bad, it's just not going to want to run right. Now what happens if you start getting into boost using bad fuel? Those values are going to increase because you're putting a lot more demand on the engine and it just doesn't have the proper fuel to be able to stay up with that demand accurately and at its optimal. So before making videos, I used to work in the petroleum industry, specifically working with gas stations. Now the couple things that I learned when I was doing this is that if you come across a fuel station that looks like it's been run down or it just doesn't look like a quality fuel station, I would highly suggest staying away. Now sometimes with those more rundown looking fuel stations, what can happen is they don't always service their underground fuel tanks, and what can happen over time is water can start to leak into those fuel tanks and mix with the fuel. Water is more dense than fuel, so what's going to happen is that water is going to sink down to the bottom of the tank and the fuel is going to sit on top of it. Now how a fuel pump works in those giant fuel containers that are underground is that it's going to start pulling fuel from the lowest point in the tank, and since the water is more dense than the fuel, you're going to end up getting water and fuel mixture going into your fuel tank, and just you don't want that to happen. Like I said, if that does happen, stay out of boost. Now there are some temporary measures that you can take to try to increase that octane rating back up to what it needs to be. Now if you do have access to ethanol, adding in a small amount of ethanol to your fuel, even if you're not on a flex fuel sensor, can help bring that octane rating back up. Keep in mind that fuel does have up to 10% ethanol in it to help with octane. Now, I'm not telling you to go overboard and crazy and just dump a ton of ethanol in your car if you don't have an ethanol sensor. Don't do that. It will ruin your car. You will not be happy. It's not going to run right. It's going to make matters worse. I will link below a calculator for gas to fuel mixtures to calculate E percentage. And if you are going to be doing this, you want to try to get that E percentage under 10%. Now, that's going to be the most extreme that I suggest you do. However, octane booster is another good option that a lot of people out there use to help try to compensate for any bad fuel that goes into their fuel tank. Now, all in all, if you do get bad fuel in your tank, what I suggest you do is just stay out of boost, drive the car normal. If you start getting into boost, you're going to be demanding a lot on the engine, and it just doesn't have the proper fuel to keep up with that demand. Oil, very important, right? Keeps our cars alive, keeps everything lubricated, makes all the metal-to-metal contact happy in the engine bay. However, don't let your car starve of oil. I've seen it happen more times than it should, and I didn't want to touch on it, but I feel like I have to touch on it because it happens to people and I don't want it to happen to you. Don't want it to happen to anyone. Now, where does that oil come from? It can come from quite a few places. You can have a bad gasket, a bad seal, and that oil is leaking through there, getting into areas it shouldn't, getting onto the ground, getting all over the engine bay. You also have oil that's flowing through the PCV system because it's trying to equalize pressure between the heads and the crankcase gases need to go somewhere. So specifically with most turbocharged engine, those crankcase gases get pushed back into the intake tract where they then get burned off and just passed through the system. Now you can definitely go ahead and add an air oil separator to your car if you wanted to try to reduce some of the oil blow by and keep that oil going back into the system. Now, turbocharged cars are not the only ones that are susceptible to this issue. Higher compression engines are just as susceptible because you have a lot going on in there. You got a lot of pressure building up. They are more prone to blowing out seals. They are more prone to passing oil through areas where they just shouldn't pass through oil. You look at my BRZ, for example, the cam carriers are one thing that leak oil all the time. Don't know why. Higher compression engines, peeing oil everywhere. We don't want that. High compression and turbocharged cars, you guys need to stay on top of your oil maintenance. If not, you will starve your engines of oil, which is not a good thing to do. Plus, if you're pushing a whole bunch of oil through the PCV system, you already know you're going to be reducing your octane rating with those oil vapors that are going into the cylinder, mixing with the air-fuel ratio and denaturing that fuel a little bit more too. So I mean, an air oil separator, catch can, both very good options. But if you do happen to fall victim to oil starvation in your car, there's actually a ton. There are actually, you know what, just kiss your engine goodbye at that point, because if you run out of oil in your car and you're getting into boost and you're sending it, you're gonna need a new block, my friend. So my suggestion to you guys is to go ahead and check your oil at least every 1,500 miles to make sure that it is not starving itself until you at least become familiar with the engine. I know for my STI, for example, I can at least make it until that 3,000 mile interval until oil either needs to be added or changed. But every engine is going to vary, and the condition of your engine is also going to play a factor into making sure that oil is staying in it. So I didn't want to spend too much time on this one because I feel like it's a very common thing, but touched on it anyways. The last one I want to touch on is one that's brought up by a lot of people, so I'm going to say it as a friendly reminder for everyone. High demand and low load. If you are driving your car and you are in 6th gear at 1500 RPM and you decide to just chooch on the throttle, nothing's going to happen for quite a while because your car needs to build boost, especially on the intercooler and turbo setup that you have. It's going to dictate how far that air has to travel and how long it takes for that turbo to spool up. So, I mean, I really feel like I don't need to say this, but I see it happen quite frequently and I see it on a lot of the Facebook groups. Downshift your car, get into the proper gear to match the power that you want to get to, and then get on the throttle. And also, when it comes to driving these cars, any turbo car, for that matter, don't just gas all the way down. Work your way into it gradually. Take it out for dinner first. Welcome it home. Meet the parents. Get on that throttle nicely. There's no need to just jump right into that relationship. Take your time. Slow it down. Build up the power, get into it, shift your gear. If you're in the wrong gear and you just try to get on the throttle, there are some bad things that can happen. So for example, if we were in that 6th gear scenario and I was at 1500 RPM and I just decided to mash on the throttle, what's going to happen is the engine is going to send a lot of fuel into the cylinders to try and make the power that I'm requesting. So this is the high demand. I'm requesting a lot of the engine. We're at a low load, 1500 RPM. That fuel in there can have pre-ignition. Essentially what's happening is you get a detonation before it's supposed to detonate. It can cause a lot of damage. You can crack piston rings. Then you're gonna have to rebuild your engine because you just destroyed your pistons. You just melted everything together and did a terrible magic trick that you cannot undo unless it costs you thousands of dollars to do. So friendly reminder to everyone, high demand, low load, don't do it. Just match the gear that you're trying to get into for the power that you want. If you're up too high, just downshift. If you're down too low, just upshift. You shouldn't be too low and have to upshift unless you're already in power, but you get what I'm saying. Don't do it. So not too long of a video today, mainly just friendly reminders for everyone. And if this is new information to you guys, then I hope it did help you so that way you avoid some of these pitfalls and mistakes that I see other owners out there make. Last thing I want to see is anyone destroy an engine. So just to recap, 1, don't get into boost or really beat on the car when your IATs are super high. 2, don't starve your car of oil. These are totally out of order also. Oh well. Make sure there's oil in your car. Very easy to do. Check it every 1500 miles or so. That'll give you an idea of how much oil your engine may or may not consume. 3, make sure you got good fuel. You don't want to be going to the local quickie mart that looks like it has been updated since 1940 and you want to get gas there because it's $1.30 a gallon versus the Shell down the road. That's $2.65 a gallon. Lastly, high demand, low load. Don't do it. Don't request a lot from the car when those RPMs are super low. But that is all I got for you guys on this one. So hopefully this information was a friendly reminder to you guys, or like I said, if it was new, hopefully it helps you out. So if you liked the video, you know what to do. Go ahead, hit that like button and turn it blue like the actual color of the Subaru. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit your boy up right there in that corner. Go ahead, smash that button and hit your boy up. And with that, I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out, homies. Woo!